Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second in the series of clinical questions. We've really had a lot of fun. Hi to Amy and all those of you that I know, and Mary, thanks so much for joining us. We had quite a few questions come in about vestibular related issues. And so yesterday I called Mary and I said, Mary, would you love to join me? And she graciously agreed to join in on the conversation. So I thought I would let Mary take the first couple of questions and I may come in and comment a little bit afterwards. But so the first one, Mary, I put up on the screen. I have a client who frequently reports getting dizzy whenever we introduce movement, but especially on the swing. What is your best recommendation for using the equipment without the child getting too dizzy? So I thought maybe you might want to talk a little bit about dizziness and how you see that. Oh, you might need to unmute, Mary.
First of all, I think it's important to kind of step back and see what is dizziness all about. Dizziness is a normal response to movement. And so if we move, or the more we move, I would say, the more likely we are to be dizzy, particularly for rotary movement. So, but on a swing, for the most part, this would be a more linear movement. But I think that we have to take into account that the vestibular system doesn't function independent of other sensory systems. And so when you're on a swing, you're getting a lot of what we think of as visual flow. So as you're moving, your eyes are picking up. It looks like the world is moving back and forth. And so if this is not something that this individual has been processing over time, that may be very disruptive to them, rather than it helping them to appreciate that they are moving in an environment and having that be organizing for them. It's confusing to them because these two systems, the visual system and the vestibular system, through life experiences with that individual, have not had enough opportunity to really support each other, so that you would be able to tolerate and actually enjoy swinging. So probably there's always a reason why a system is not organized. So something in this child's past has impeded their ability to have experiences that get these two systems to really be integrated, so that because they are hardwired together and they are designed to support each other. You know, the vestibular system is our most important system about telling us exactly where we are in gravity. And as we're moving through space, the visual system is supporting that postural information that is supported through the vestibular system, and makes it, the whole experience, be a multi-sensory informative system for us. So getting dizzy is a very typical, appropriate response to movement. But if a person doesn't quickly recover from that dizziness, then this is an indication of some kind of immaturity or lack of communication between the vestibular system and the central nervous system. Because typically when one gets dizzy, the higher brain centers will create a suppression so that dizziness goes away. So it should be very quickly dispelled. And if it's not, that means that inhibitory response from the central nervous system is not doing what it's designed to do. And it's going to have increased experiences that begin to build the understanding of that communication between vision and movement.
Thank you, Mary. That was lovely. I don't know. Let's take the next one, and then if there is just a question about what you're talking about, we can open up people's microphone for that. Then I have this one actually comes up quite a bit, questions about car sickness and how to treat that. So if you want to chat a little bit about that, how it could be addressed, and could you explain the relationship in terms of integration?
Okay, well, when about riding in a car, this is a situation where the vestibular system is giving you one kind of information and the visual system is giving you another kind of information. Namely, your vestibular system says you're centered in gravity, you're sitting and you're not moving in space. But your visual system, you're picking up information from the flow of information that is, coming through the windows of the car that tell your system that you are moving through space. And so part of the maturation of the system is to be able to resolve what would be two independent or incompatible pieces of information. With experience, there is increased understanding of how these two systems are working together. So certainly a child who's getting car sick needs to have a lot more experiences of being, stationary in space and moving through space. So it's really thinking about, sometimes when we think about, well, a child is on a swing, we think about that as just stimulating the vestibular system, but it's also stimulating the visual system and other systems, of course, but we're kind of focusing on these two. And so the more that the child is exposed to this combined information, there will be increased integration, which means increased ability to interpret these different sensory systems in a supportive way. So gradually introducing movement, we can think of the body stationary and being moved, or the body actually moving. These are different kinds of input, and a child needs a whole variety of these. In today's world, usually the problem is one that we're being moved in space more than we are actually moving through space. And the vestibular system is designed to tell us about our movements through space, to inform our neuromuscular system as well as our visual system, so that we can in fact be able to process this information. So thinking in terms of or perhaps stepping back to get a history on this child can be really important. For example, if they've had perhaps recurrent ear infections, maybe that vestibular system was not working properly. They might have been getting a lot of movement experiences, but the threshold had been raised because the ear infections are disruptive to vestibular processing. And so even though they might have had the opportunity, if they also had the imposition of ear infections, that would compromise that ability. And of course, all of this is also very closely related to how I feel about movement. If movement is not something that is joyful to me, then I'm going to be very anxious with any movement, and that's going to further complicate the whole system in terms of how we're going to respond to it. So it's really a multi-sensory approach that's needed to get the physical body able to deal with movement, both neuromuscularly and visually, and to have the emotional system develop the confidence through better or more positive experiences, so that we don't set up stress and anxiety around that whole movement process.
Mary, as usual, when we chat together, you make my mind go. So I would just can add into this. So when you think about what Mary said about the vestibular system, it works stationary, like telling you where you are in the field of gravity when you are being moved versus when you are moving. Then we also have to think about, as Mary said, that vestibular system partners with other sensory systems, particularly somatosensory. So what is the body's position? What is the body's alignment relative to gravity, relative to the movement? And that's off for a lot of our kids. So where, if they're sitting on one cheek, where is the somatosensory pressure and what's going on with the spine, head, and neck, which are going to be key. As she said, it talks to the proprioceptive somatosensory system, but the somatosensory system also talks back. And then that agreement key with visual vestibular, but also the alignment piece, is another huge component of what we look at with kids who are having car sickness. And I know that I've had a lot of success treating car sickness when I take all those things into consideration and start to work with them. The other thing that Mary said, and as this question came up, and we were preparing just the slides yesterday, it came to mind that it's not as usual. I think the key points are what Mary said with the visual vestibular misconnection, or not talking to each other is how I say it, and the somatosensory system. However, in multiple ear infections and in some people with very severe sensory processing, I have seen when we use modulated music, I've seen car sickness in a couple of cases go away. And I would say that is the exception, but why would that be? Because the vestibular visual system also works with the auditory system, but I'm talking about more the less conscious part of the auditory system that surveys the space and understands the space that exists around us and what's going on in it. So we can be moving, vision and visual flow or a target can be moving, but also sounds can move around us. And so they sometimes play a minor role in car sickness, and sometimes they play a major role. So it really is and I think always, every time we get a clinical question, I want a full assessment. And Mary, I think you brought that up. You need to step back and really look at the big picture and what's playing a big role in this individual's case. I don't know if you want to say any more, Mary, about that, or.
No, I think the multi-sensory approach is essential to really get to the bottom of it, rather than jumping in and saying, well, I have to do vestibular input, or I have to get more visual flow. But to really look at all of these things are almost always happening concurrently. They're having an impact, which for most children, putting them in motion on play equipment is very joyful. But if the communication between these systems is not functioning optimally, then that's going to be more of an unpleasant experience than a pleasant experience. And like Sheila said, it can come primarily from one system, but it's going to affect all of them. Sometimes one more than another, but all of them are going to be engaged whenever we are in the field of gravity and moving or being moved, and our response is going to predict how well those systems are communicating with each other.
And I like what you said about stepping back. Tracy and I just finished a minute ago doing a clinical mentorship with another therapist. And one of the things Tracy said that I really liked today is you need to assess the big picture and then weigh. So here, car sickness, you need to assess all the vestibular and all of its partner systems and weigh out what you think is the biggest contributor right now, and then look at how they work together, how they're integrated. I think we've gone kind of down the rabbit hole with sensory processing, and we'll keep looking at single sensory systems, how they work. And we really have to get back to looking at that integration of it. Mary, thanks so much for joining us. I have one more question here, but I just super appreciate your time and the clarity and the way in which you deliver information. So
Sheila and Mary.
Yeah, Tracy, go ahead.
There's just a question that has come in, knowing this information about thinking about multiple systems working together. Are there any specific examples that you could give for potential activities that you might be thinking about in this situation?
I have one, Mary. Do you want me to go first or?
Well, maybe, how about if I just go quickly? And
go for it, yeah.
One of my favorite stories was a boy who was probably about 9 years old, and he couldn't go one block in a car without getting car sick. And so I had him start, whenever he went through a door, I'd have him just turn around once, hold onto the door frame, and then go through the door whenever he thought about it. And so in his case, it was primarily that he wasn't getting good vestibular information. And he very quickly, when that was the primary target, he very quickly recovered and was, totally able to handle riding in a car. But, that would be just one example of one approach that worked.
And I've also found, and we talk about this in a lot of our courses and use this one particular exercise, is I like the wiggle jiggles on your back because your head and neck and spine are in alignment, and I would make sure that that happens. And then gentle oscillations, which causes the head to rock, the skull to rock on the neck, and actually gets all the proprioceptors up the spine to be activated, which then is really clear proprioceptive input, and it is also vestibular input. You also can do putting like a Gertie ball deflated on the back of the head so that you don't want the neck too craned forward, and just gently bouncing the head and rocking the head back and forth, but the body is stable. So you're kind of amping the vestibular proprioceptive input. I think those are activities that work for me. It's interesting. Mary does, her system loves the rotary, but I think that you have to play around with what's going to work for the child. I also know from being vestibularly sensitive that gradually building my tolerance to rotation was super helpful, like the doorway spins. So, and kind of putting all those pieces together. So I don't know, were there any other questions about those two questions, Tracy?
The next question is more related to astronaut training compared to therapeutic listening. Do you want to do that now or after the next question?
And well, let's do it while Mary's still there.
Perfect.
I might as well do it while we have her. And then I think the next question is more general. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this therapist is debating between doing astronaut training or therapeutic listening. And she is an OT and works with a child who does not tolerate headphones. Could you elaborate on potentially what course she might consider taking?
Well, I think it would be helpful to know more about the child. I think that's going to help us decide our entry point. And what are the clinical things that she's seeing that said to her, I really want to do a therapeutic listening or astro. What is she going after? What is her main goal? Is she online with us right now, Tracy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
I am.
Okay, go ahead. If you could just tell us a little bit about that child, I think that'll help us with that.
Okay, so the child has sensory issues. So he has Down syndrome and autism. And again, he does not tolerate headphones and he keeps spinning constantly. So he seeks a vestibular input and as well as proprioceptive input.
Okay, well, there you have it. I would go first with the astronaut training. I wouldn't rule out the therapeutic listening, but he's really telling you that's what he needs. And I think the astronaut training, and Mary, you can come back on this, going to give you a way to get that spinning with precision, because I could probably mind read Mary's going to say, and what we see is it often only spinning in one direction, and where's the head at? And so by really following with precision to the best of your ability, the astronaut training, I think that's going to be your first point. And then I do think that he would also benefit from listening. And if you didn't think you could keep headphones on, I would think about two things. I would think about what we found with quick shifts in some of our preliminary practice-based evidence is that some of the changes were prone extension, supine flexion, and standing balance, which would say to you that you're getting into the vestibular system, which we know that you do through rhythm, that there is a crossover between the vestibular and the auditory. So that would be your easiest route to go. And just in terms of those two things, I think once you got family and or staff or however you were doing astronaut training in line, I would start adding in the quick shifts, at least knowing from my treating children with Down syndrome before how incredibly well they do with the therapeutic listening. It's a very undertreated population and people don't expect much, and we usually get a ton from them.
And the astronaut protocol, when you think of it both in terms of its linear component as well as its rotary component, you're really tapping into the processing in all 5 of the vestibular receptors. And so this child has the kind of innate knowing that he needs movement, but is not getting movement in a precise and comprehensive enough way for that to provide what he's going after.
Yeah, super.
Thank you so much. A quick question about it. So then I'm going to do actually both. And so then can the therapeutic listening be modified in a way that if they cannot tolerate headphones, it could be modified? Or does the astronaut training protocol also includes the auditory system that he can have the benefits without having headphones in the beginning?
So the astronaut training includes the auditory system in that we use the astro sounds, and the astro sounds give you a spatial element and a ground sound. That's the most basic thing we get from the way, at least in therapeutic listening. It's not always in all sound protocols, but in therapeutic listening, we have that element of space and an anchor, but we really have it clearly demarcated in the astronaut sounds. So he doesn't have to wear headphones at all for that. And in therapeutic listening, there's multiple libraries. In the quick shift library, you do not have to use headphones. And I would say because of his diagnosis and the challenge right now, it doesn't mean it has to stay that way in the future, would be keeping headphones on. So I wouldn't go there. I would just see what you could get from, and I'd stay with the quick shift library. And my guess is something with a heavy rhythm, like a bilateral integration quick shift, would probably be a good starting point for him, unless his sensory issues had a lot of reactivity in them, or extreme like issues with low frequency sound, or a lot of really extreme emotional issues. Then I might stay with something in the quick shifts that was about regulation. So then you can get more refined in how you use them, but in a really general way, a gravitational great quick shift or a bilateral integration quick shift. But I would start your astronaut training first and get it down and get it precise and see what you're getting from it for your purposes and for family purposes, so you know what each thing that you're adding is giving you, so that you can learn to modify it. If you put everything in at once, you don't know what gave you what. And it feels like he needs the anchor, which that really solid anchor is. Astronaut training, I would never go back in time and not have it ever again. I mean, once I really locked on to what Mary was doing, and I'm just going to admit, Mary, it took me a while. And I think that's fair to say for people. And I think for me, especially, it was because of my own, how I felt about vestibular input. It kind of like, and I see people doing that, putting on the brakes, and everybody's got to go at their own pace, but I wouldn't want to be a therapist without it. And after I talked to Mary, I'm sending my granddaughter a sit and spin on Amazon today. So anyway, so that's kind of, where I'm at with it. Anyway.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Tracy, I think we have just 1 minute left. Is that next question pretty short, or was there a follow-up question? Because we can do the next one next week as well.
Yeah, the next question is a little bit more lengthy. It's about a case, so maybe we'll save that question
Okay.
for next week. I'm not seeing any other questions coming into the chat at this moment in time.
Well, then this might be just a perfect place. I'm just looking at time. We're right on time to end. So we can take the longer case next week. And I really thank all of you for showing up in person. How fun. I know we'll be seeing some people on recording later. And thank you so much, Mary, for joining us at the last minute as these questions came in. And I really wanted your
My pleasure.
well. So thanks, everyone. So we'll see you all again, maybe next week, or you'll see us in recording next week.